lot of us sort of habitually or instinctively think that in order to paint something, we've got to fly to somewhere better or more beautiful than where we happen to be. Of course, that's not true. A good painter can do a good painting in their kitchen or their own backyard or their neighborhood. But I thought, taking that one step further, a good painter ought to be able to find ample subject matter inside, in all of our memory banks of dreams and imagination, memory, and just pure invention. So I wanted to explore that a little bit with you guys tonight, live. And also, yes, I've written some articles about this, and just, well, anyway, I'm writing another book. I had a new book come out a year or so ago, but I'm in the midst of my next one, which I've spent part of the last year doing on this very topic, painting from imagination. Subjects that are not real, but they're derived from reality, from our memory banks, from our inspirations. I could talk forever, but I should get painting. So I live in Los Angeles on the west side, Venice, California, which turns out is not a bad place to paint anyway. So too bad I can't fly over the world. But anyway, in the evenings, I usually take my little doggy, Otis, for a walk down along the beach and in the Venice canals. And they're very beautiful as they are. There's plenty of paintings you can do. But for example, as reference, I don't have a reference for the painting I'm doing. But this tree I walk by almost every day, if you can see it, this beautiful old ficus tree. So that I sort of stored away in my memory banks. This is a very typical scene. Little rowboats in the Venice canals pulled up to little makeshift docks. And it's very beautiful, very peaceful, very calm. A great place to go at the end of any day, but certainly these days that have been so stressful. So what I'm trying to do by showing you these is give you a sense of the mood. I always try to counsel myself and my students in my classes really not to paint what you see. Don't try to duplicate what you see, try to interpret it. I think it's the artist's job to interpret the world around them rather than just try to replicate it. I do want to say quickly, though, that there is no one right way to paint in watercolor or anything else. There's probably no one right way to do anything, but you have to find the ways that resonate with you. And this is just a peek into my technique. So I'll walk around, I'll think of things. I always have a sketchbook with me, but often I'll come home, I'll sit down, or I'll lie in bed, I'll wake up in the morning, and I'll just doodle. This was based on a number of walks in the Venice Canal. So this is a made-up composition. It's sort of an idea of that tree, an idea of these boats reimagined, rearranged, an idea of some docks that aren't really there, but I've sort of imagined them. And then I try to design my painting or a potential painting. I do thousands of these little doodles. Some may end up as paintings. Many just stay as they are. They're not especially good drawings. It's just what I call a visual diary. My sketchbook is my visual, nonverbal diary. This one I liked quite a lot, so I developed it into a painting, and I'm going to do it again for you guys tonight. Another reason these little sketches are helpful, though, I should say, is it's important to remember some obvious things. A painting, a drawing, is done on a flat sheet of paper. We have only two dimensions, height, width. So anything we can do to imply a third dimension of dimensionality and perspective is to the good. Usually in my classes, whenever I mention the word perspective, about 20 or 30 collective sets of shoulders begin to hunch and necks get tight. But really, perspective is just simply common sense. Things in a painting or a drawing, there are little simple tricks you can play to make something look forward of something else. I won't go into great depth, but the most important one of those is the layering or organization, the design of the values in your final work. All of my work is arranged, designed around 3 primary values: dark, light, and mid-tone. Obviously, there are many more values, but I think for a dynamic painting to have a sense of depth and perspective that works, you need to have 3 basic values arranged spatially into midground, background, foreground. The dark does not have to be in the foreground. It can be anywhere in your painting. But I think if you organize your paintings into that spatial arrangement of lights in one space, darks in another, midtones in yet another, it's quite amazing how simply you can get this sense of drama, dimension, and narrative in your work. Those of you poor souls that are going to take my workshop are going to get a real earful on that. But tonight will just be a taste. So anyway, I do these sketches not every time before I do a painting, but pretty much every time, almost every time. I use these as my roadmap, my visual blueprint. Much more than any reference photo, I often counsel myself and my students to see something, take photos if you will, do a sketch and throw the photos away. They're not really going to be that useful. You end up getting stuck in details and in trying to replicate what you see rather than just expressing yourself in the painting. So I've cheated a bit. I've done the layout sketch of this first. This is a little more drawn than I would normally do for myself, but I did want this to show up on camera as best as it can. I would say, generally speaking, it's a bad idea to overdraw your base drawing. Just do indications of basic shapes, and that's really all you need. If you allow your brush to do the rest, you'll be better off. Okay, so my value organization in this painting is the midground here is going to be my lightest light, which in watercolor, the power of what you don't paint is just as potent as the power of what you do paint. So that means the parts of the painting that you save as untouched white paper have enormous strength. The sketches are very useful also in helping you to identify where those areas are and where you know you don't want to paint, where you want to save untouched white paper. So this is a big hockey style brush, or a mid-sized one, just pure water I'm putting on for now. This way I can maintain a soft edge in the midground going into the background. And then I can maintain, as this dries, it'll stay pure white, untouched paper. I almost always work my paintings up from light to dark, usually from the warmer tones to the cooler, although not always, but often. This is intended to be sort of a late in the day, sort of not sunset so much, but that beautiful time right before sunset when everything goes a little bit gold and warm. So I'm using tones of ochre and little bits of orange and red. And as you can see, I'm not holding any edges. I'm painting right over everything. The actual objects are not as important as the arrangement of values. So I work rather wet, generally speaking. I love everything about watercolor, even the parts of watercolor that drive me crazy, I love. a lot of people comment on how they have a hard time mastering watercolor or controlling it. And I always say, well, that's your problem. You should never try to do that. I mean, yes, you can have a certain amount of control, but if you try to have too much control over watercolor, it will come back to bite you. It's better to know who's in charge, watercolor is, and let it do its thing. So yeah, these are big wet washes. What I'm trying to do here is paint the light by not painting it. I get often asked, how do you paint light in watercolor? And my smart ass answer is, I don't. The light is already painted. It's the pure white of the paper. With a transparent medium, it's the white of the paper shining through, that's the light. So you don't paint light, it's already there. What you paint are the shadows and the shades that give light its identity. You'll also notice I'll turn my board or my page upside down or sideways a lot. You probably can't tell in the overhead shot, but I work at a pretty steep angle. The reason for that is to use the other advantage that watercolor gives the painter, and that is gravity. They haven't managed to charge for gravity yet, it's still free. So yeah, if you turn your board this way and that and allow gravity to pull the paint in the direction you want it, your job gets a lot easier, especially when you work fairly wet as I do. So I think you can probably see already what I'm doing is painting this painting in bands of value. So far, just midtones. The light, as I say, is already there. And all I'm doing is adding a little bit of midtones in the background here. So I'm going to be building up a band of light, a band of midtone, another band of midtone. The darkest darks will be the last thing to happen, and they will go on top of everything else. Generally speaking, the value arrangement in this painting is my midground is light, my foreground and my background are midtone, and then the closest foreground elements will be the darkest darks. As far as representation, what I'm also going for here is a sort of dissolution of demarcation. I'm trying to get a sense of this mysterious sort of hazy end of day feeling. So I don't want you to see the horizon. I want to give an effect of mist coming up off the water of the canal. So I'm using that area of light that I've saved right through the middle to hopefully imply mist rising up off the water as the air cools. And that way you can't see the distant horizon, the houses and the trees in the background. I hope you can just pick them out, but they're not very distinct to give it an overall mysterious feeling. I talk a lot when I'm painting, so I hope it's helpful rather than distracting. But if I don't talk, I get very nervous and then I can't paint. But I also think it's kind of my job to try to help talk people through what I'm trying to do as I'm doing it as best I can. I've watched a million demos by artists that don't say a word, and I'm always wondering, why are they doing this? Why are they doing that? Why did he pick this brush? Why did she use that color? So I try my best to give you a look inside what I'm thinking while I'm doing it. So, yes.
So Thomas, somebody has asked in the chat, when do you decide on the colors that you're going to be using?
Great question. I don't always use the same colors. it really depends on the sort of mood I'm after in the painting. But I don't think of myself as a great colorist. I paint primarily in value. Value comes before color for me every single time. Once I've decided on the sort of lighting effect I'm after, this is a late in the day painting, as I said, so I know that there will be a lot of warm colors, subtle but warm tones. So anyway, to answer the question, after I've done the sketch, after I know the general idea of the painting, then I began to think of the values, and after that, I begin to assign a color range to those values. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Is it possible to
Yes.
scoot your canvas, yeah, just a little bit to the right, because people can't see the left side of it.
I'm sorry, is it clipped off? Let me see if I can raise this up a bit.
Oh, yes, that's better. Thank you.
Sure.
And then
Yeah,
what angle is it that you are painting at? Somebody was at.
Tonight, this is about a 25-degree angle. I generally, if I'm painting plein air, it's much more steep than that. In studio work, it's, I don't know, it's not a formula, but it's roughly speaking 25 to 35-degree angle. Just enough to get the water to run down the page. What I'm doing now is scraping in some sort of olive green tones in the background here to imply the trees on the far side of the canal. And I want to do it now before that sky wash I laid in dries completely. Because the other amazing thing about watercolor are the variety of edges you can get. Watercolor is almost all about edges. It can go obviously from very hard, defined edges to very, very soft, wet and wet implied edges. And I love playing around with that dynamic range. But as they come down and come a little bit further, I want them to sort of dissolve into this band of light, of the mist rising up off the water. This is a round synthetic brush I'm using and just sort of scrubbing, being not terribly careful on purpose. I'm just trying to make it look casual and haphazard back there. Another little technique I can show is here, as these little houses in the background and the foliage comes down and meets this mist rising off the water, I don't really want a hard edge there. So this was wet. It still is a bit, but not wet enough. But with a little spray bottle, you can introduce additional water to soften an edge if it's too hard. And then you get, with the tilted board, you get the water pulling down and you get much more misty effect. Then with a paper towel, you can modify that if you wish a little bit here and there. No need to go too crazy, but I just want to maintain as much white as I can. Being a late in the day painting, there's not a lot of light. There's only a little bit in this one band. So obviously it's very important to maintain its integrity. I talk a lot about the importance of design in my former life. Well, I still am an architect, although I don't practice anymore. I'm a full-time painter. But I think when I was trying to evolve from the life of an architect to the life of an artist, I assumed I had to throw all that knowledge and all those years of experience away, thinking they would just get in my way and stop me. But you know, that's not true. Just like this painting, I think whatever we've gone through in our lives, whatever experiences we've had, bad or good, there's always something we can take and apply it to whatever it is we're doing. So if there's one primary thing I've learned from my years as an architect, it's the importance of design. And when I say design, I sort of mean design with a big D, not small d. What I mean is the idea of design itself. And when you really think about it and break it down, the idea of design is the art of decision, of choosing what to leave in, what to leave out. If you're an architect designing a private house, you're probably going to use very different materials than if you're designing a factory or a place of worship or a school. You don't use the same materials. If you're a good cook, which I'm not, you know that you can't put everything in your spice rack into everything you're cooking. Certain things need to be left in, certain things need to be left out. Same thing, if you're a painter, an artist, well, there's all kinds of ways of being an artist, but if you're an artist who happens to paint, I think it's important to think about the kind of painting you're doing, the kind of painter you want to be, and then decide every color that I might have used for one painting is not going to translate one-to-one necessarily to the next painting I'm doing. I look back at a lot of my older work, even things I thought weren't too bad, and I'm very self-critical, as I expect we all are, and I realized the one thing I think I could have done as the painter I was 10 years ago that I hope I'm better at now is I could have designed a little better. I could have decided to edit a little bit more stringently. I look at my old work and I think there's just too much stuff going on. There are too many colors, too many techniques, too many brush marks, too much of everything. So anyway, in the organized part of my brain, which does exist, it doesn't control me, but it's there. I think about what it means to design a painting. And I've come up with a hierarchy of 4 considerations that I think are worth thinking about. They're not rules. I don't believe in those kind of rules. They're just what works for me. So the 4 things that go through my mind when I'm designing a painting in order of importance are, number 1, what is your intent? Why did you decide to go do a painting today rather than lie on the couch and watch Netflix or something? But I mean, it really is just that fundamental. Why did you want to be a painter? What kind of painter do you want to be? You don't have to have all the answers. In fact, the answer might just be another question. It often is for me. I don't have all the answers, God knows. But when you set out to do a specific painting, this painting, for example, I had to ask myself, well, why are you doing this painting? What are you trying to say? It doesn't have to be some important biblical allegory or some heavy philosophical message. It could be something very humble, very simple, very basic. And for me, it just was, I wanted to capture that sense of home, peace, quietude, solitude almost in the good sense.
How the hell are you getting to do that in such a short period of time without it oozing out all over everywhere?
What's that? I'm sorry, was that a question?
I'm sorry, I was just murmuring.
That's all right.
I think somebody was wondering how you could paint on wet like that and not have the paint oozing all over in that tree.
It did use a bit, which I don't mind. I mean,
Lost sound.
Thomas, somehow you got muted. Let's see if we can unmute you here.
yeah, there we go.
Yeah, I just
Okay, I'm
Is that
sorry,
up?
we lost about that. We lost your answer there.
No, gosh. I do most of my paintings all at once, meaning I don't do a lot of glazing or come back to visit them later. So if that's the case, you have to sort of stage your paintings. I know that I want harder edges here, so I want to work up here for a while to give this a bit of time to dry. Up here, I didn't have to wait that long because I didn't mind a few lost edges along with the found edges. So that's all.
Okay, so you're constantly thinking about where you're going to work next and where you want your edges to be harder and what's drier and what's not.
Yeah, I'm fiddling around up here doing this little tree house I invented, not because it's so important overall, but because I want to give this a little bit, another minute or two to dry before I start messing that up. This is the focus of my painting is almost, the focus, center of focus of any painting is almost always where your lightest light meets your darkest dark. That's going to be right here, pretty much just off center in the painting. So you want the clarity of edges here is far more important than any clarity up here or certainly back there. So this needs, you know, more time to dry to be sure I can hold an edge. Up here, it doesn't matter so much.
And are you using rough or smooth paper? Is that a hot press or a cold press? Somebody wants to know.
I never use hot press. And I never use cold press either. This is rough surface. Almost always I use rough surface paper because it allows for me to do this. It stops the washes from flowing too much. It allows colors to transition more slowly, but more, I think, more beautifully. It allows that luminosity of watercolor that I am always after. In a wet solution of water and pigment on rough surface, it flows over, sinks into the little valleys, floats over the little mountaintops, and you get that shimmery, speckled appearance that I am always after. So this is a 140-pound Arches paper, rough, bright white, which is a pretty workhorse kind of paper. I do use it quite a lot. So back to my hierarchy of design considerations. First and foremost is the idea. What is it you're trying to paint and why? Not even how are you going to paint it. I get so many questions about how do you do this? What colors did you use? Which paper? All those are interesting, sort of important questions, but the really, truly important question is, Why are you painting in the first place? What is it you have to say? And why do you love to paint? What are you up to? First and foremost, in every painting, I ask myself, why am I painting this as opposed to sitting on the couch eating potato chips? There has to be some emotional content, some emotional driver to make me want to do it. And that's what I try to paint. I love the space where I live. I love this feeling of certain days. So that's what I'm trying to paint. That's my story. The second consideration is, okay, you've got the idea of what you want to paint. How do you arrange the pieces of visual vocabulary, your visual language? How do you arrange that into the pieces of this painting you want to do? That, of course, is where the sketch comes in. That way you can decide whether you want to do a horizontal, a vertical composition, where you want the pieces to go, where you want your center of interest, which side you want it weighted on. All of those considerations of composition come to mind. Again, if you're going to take my class, we'll talk a lot more about the specifics of composition, but those are the things that run through my head. My third out of 4 big considerations is, once you have the basic compositions of shapes more or less decided, either in your brain or on your sketchbook, values. You have to assign the values. Where do you want your lights? Where do you want your darks? Where do you want your midtones? And fourth, last but not least, color. I think probably like all of us, I love color, but I say this makes some people angry, and I apologize in advance. But very often I think color is the question, but it's almost never the answer. Color is seductive. It helps carry the emotional story through your painting, but it's never going to pull the narrative through your painting. A paint, no matter what beautiful color you use, if you don't have a coherent value organization, those colors will fall flat. Colors are only as good as the values that they carry. So yeah, I love color. I can't go into an art supply store without an adult to supervise me. I want everything. But the truth is, a very few colors are generally enough to do almost any painting. Too many colors can make
Lee
a
is
much...
asking, Lee is asking if there's a maximum on number of colors that you would use in a painting.
There's not really a fixed maximum. I would say if you're using more than around 6, you might be running into some problems. 6 or 8. I'll do paintings with 2 or 3, often 4 colors. If I start to get more than 6, often my paintings will look muddled, confused, and a little schizophrenic. But I also want to say, again, I don't have answers. These are just things that work for me. They may not work for everybody. There are other painters who are much more adept at handling things that I'm not as good at. I think I'm an okay colorist, but I don't think it is necessarily my strong suit. I think values in a painting are far more important, but that's me. And yeah, I don't paint like you, and you don't paint like me, and that's a beautiful thing.
Joe is asking, what did you use to get the brown?
This brown is literally out of the tube, a Van Dyke brown. The dark here is ultramarine blue. There's also some burnt sienna in the brown and a little bit of neutral tint just to get it really dark. This is primarily burnt sienna, and ultramarine blue. I paint always in contrasts and complements. As a painter, I'm obsessed with contrast, and I don't just mean light and dark, although I do mean that, but I also mean horizontal versus vertical, warm versus cool tones, light versus dark, obviously, the man-made versus the natural world. And in these more imaginary pieces, I like to contrast the real with the imagined, the past with the future, and et cetera, et cetera. I think that's another thing watercolor is so good at doing. You can go from the lost to the found, to the implied, to the stated, to the seen, to the unseen. Oh, watercolor, you are magic. If we can just get out of the way.
Pat would
and
like
allow
to
it
know how
do
you
that.
got into watercolor. Thomas, Pat would like to know how you got into watercolor.
How I got into it. Well, I don't know. I think watercolor got into me. I went to architecture school and then I went to fine art school. I thought I was going to major in fine arts in sculpture, 3D art, and I loved it. But I also loved music and I wasn't good at it. So I wasn't any good at sculpture either, really. I mean, I was okay. So I converted to painting and I assumed I'd become an oil painter because people lied to me and told me that only oil painters are serious artists. And I think I took my back went up at that and I thought, who says? So I tried watercolor just for fun and I don't know what it was. It just stuck. I think it was what I was just saying, the fact that it's so good at stating and implying, at being both strong and soft, at shouting and whispering. I just love everything about it. I also like the fact that it's backward from oil painting. It's a subtractive medium. You don't paint the light's already there. You paint the shadows, you paint the dark to allow the light to come out. So I like it on a philosophical level. I like it on a tangible level. And I just love it as an expressive medium. And I've honestly never looked back. I've tried acrylic, I've tried oil, I've tried collage, I've tried printmaking, you name it, I've tried it. And I like it all, but I don't love anything the way I love watercolor.
It looks like you've stretched your paper there. Somebody wanted to ask about that.
Oh yeah,
You always
good
stretch your
question.
paper?
I don't always know. If it is a half size or larger, I might. I did tonight because I wanted it to stay as flat as I could get it. If you tend to paint wet as I do, your paper will buckle, obviously. But if it's stapled down, it will dry flat as a pancake when it's all dry, so not to worry. So full sheets, I often stretch. Half sheets, demos and plein air, I often don't. But again, tonight I did because I'm trying to keep it as flat as I can.
Is that your dog?
No, it's not. It's a hypothetical dog. So also, this isn't really me. It's a hypothetical me with a hypothetical dog. But yeah, it could be my dog. My dog is about a third of that size, though. He's much smaller. I thought he looked out of scale, so I increased his bulk. Sorry, Otis. Otis is here right behind me. Thoroughly disinterested in art as usual. That's my dog. So you can see here, I'm being a little careful because this is sort of my center of both the narrative and of the painting. So here I'm being little smaller brushes, a little bit dry on dry, edge-based painting. Another contrast I like to try to get in much of my work is this too. One area that might be a little bit more specific, a little bit more detailed, juxtaposed to areas that are very washy, very implied. You get that really nice dialogue between the seen and the unseen, or the seen and the imagined, or barely seen and the almost seen. It's another thing. I know you can do that in oil as well, but it just looks more magical to me in watercolor, but I'm biased.
One of our people here, Sally, says, I often trace my drawings because I'm poor at sketches. Do you have an opinion on how to improve drawing skills?
I do, but it's a little bit of flat-footed answer. Just draw. And I would say give yourself a break. Just in general, I think we should all do that. Don't worry about trying to be good or excellent. As I was trying to say earlier, I do so many sketches that are really pretty bad. They're just ideas, and that's okay, you know? But there's no way to get better at drawing unless you just draw a lot. I mean, I do draw all the time. I habitually draw. So there are people that are better at it than I. I'm pretty good, but I think it's just being comfortable with it. If you can forgive yourself, if you make what you think are mistakes, may not be mistakes, just just carry on. I don't have a really harsh opinion about tracing before you paint. I don't do that only because I think it can tend to make the paintings look a little stilted or tight, but they may not. And if it's your process, if it gets you to paint, by all means, do it. But just being comfortable with drawing in general, I think is the only way to do it is to just paint. Paint a lot. I mean, draw a lot. And don't worry too much if it's perfect or not. Nothing is going to be perfect.
Do you prefer synthetic or natural brushes? And what other advice can you give us about brushes?
Yes, great question. Like everything else in watercolor, it's sort of a mixture. So I have a mixture of brushes. I have this big wash brush I was using is, I believe, squirrel hair, all natural. I have a few Escoda squirrel hair mop brushes that are beautiful. They hold lots of water and you can cover big areas with a natural hair brush more than you can a synthetic. For this kind of work, these smaller round pointed brushes are synthetic because they generally better than an all natural hair bristle brush might. So I have a whole range. Nowadays, the technology of brushes, paper, everything is changing. So there's a whole new school of thought about brushes coming online. I've been working with the company Neef out of Australia. This is a prototype. You're the first to see it, of my own signature line of brushes. They're going to be mostly mops and large wash brushes, but they are synthetic, but they behave like natural hair brushes. So they're very ethical, no squirrels or minks were harmed in the production of these, but they're designed in such a way that they hold water within the structure of the brush almost as well as a natural hairbrush. It's a very long answer to a short question. Sorry.
Good answer,
But
though. Thank you. Very informative.
You're welcome. I don't have Kolinsky Sable brushes. They are beautiful. I'm led to believe that they're not always very ethical the way they're produced. And I also just don't find them, for me, to be worth the money. They're wildly expensive. And I think they, well, for me, they're always a bit too floppy. They don't hold a point at all. And they don't do any better than a squirrel hair or an imitation squirrel hair brush would do in terms of holding water and covering lots of area. So I just don't necessarily find spending all that money on Sable hair brushes to be worth it. That said, there are painters who can't do without them, and I respect that.
I have a painter here, Suji, that says hello from 1,000 miles away in India. I don't
Hello.
mean to interrupt, but I just want to thank Mr. Schaller, not just for this demo, but for how inspiring his work has been in my watercolor journey.
That's very sweet. That's very kind to hear, and it actually means a lot. I have been inordinately blessed, I know, in my life and the opportunities. When I started out, I wanted to be an artist because I thought I'd be able to sit alone in a room, just paint, and never have to talk to people. Because as a kid, I was just so hopelessly awkward and shy and couldn't speak. And then, as fate would have it, nowadays, for the last 10 years, I do nothing but go around and talk all the time. But anyway, because of watercolor, it has opened a world to me of people and options and cultures and possibilities that I never ever would have dreamed of. So I'm very grateful. I'm a little disappointed. I was supposed to go to India this year, and that's obviously not happening. But hopefully in the future I will.
I've got Pat here asking how many years have you been doing watercolor? And also someone wants to know what is the company name that the brushes will be coming out under and when are they coming out?
Yes, the company name for the brushes is Neef, N-E-E-F. They make, well, some of you probably know Alvaro. They make his brushes, and Robert Wade, a lot of Australian artists. They will be out later this year. I also am having a signature line of paper come out this year. And also a master set of Daniel Smith watercolors. So there's some commercial plugs. They'll all be out this year. But the paper I'm coming out with is by a Chinese company, Bao Hong. If any of you have used it, it's phenomenal, beautiful paper. But it's very difficult to get in the US currently, but it's going to become a lot easier. We just have a distribution center now in the US, and it'll be available on Amazon and in Blick and in stores all over. Coming soon to the internet near you. Oh, how long have I been doing watercolor? Well, I'm only 27, so not that long. No, I've been doing watercolor my whole life, which is, gosh, I've probably been doing watercolor 40 years now, 45 years. Professionally, I did watercolors as an architectural illustrator. I went to New York when I was very young and not very smart, and thought I could become a famous artist in a matter of days. I wandered the streets of New York and went to all the famous art galleries and assumed they'd look at my awful student work and make me famous. Well, that didn't happen. So somebody said to me, you know what? You could make a living, because I had rent and bills to pay. You could probably make a living doing architectural illustration, paintings for other architects of buildings that have not yet been built. I didn't like the idea, because what was happening in those days were the very early stages of computer graphics, which always left me cold, or very hard-edged pen and ink drawings. But I knew from my studies that in the olden days, architects did a lot of their work in watercolor. And in the French school, the Beaux-Arts, many of those student works were watercolor, and a lot of the British landscape painters influenced architects. So I said, well, maybe if I could keep myself alive doing watercolors of architecture, I could keep myself alive and stay in New York. So I went home and worked up a portfolio of about a half a dozen watercolors. And this was back in the 1980s. And I began to walk the streets, so to speak. I took them around, and sure enough, it worked. I got a lot of work, and I didn't hate it. I actually quite liked it. I learned a lot of techniques. I learned a lot of skills. I learned how to run a business, sort of, more or less. I learned how to feed myself, which is a useful tool. And I was very happy doing that for many years, but something was always missing. Something more emotional, more expressive. So I became frustrated, and I sold my apartment. I left my business, and I moved to Los Angeles about 12 years ago, and determined to finally redesign myself as a fine artist. So I never entered any art shows. I always told myself that I didn't care about such things, which was really not true. What was really going on, I was afraid of being rejected. I was afraid of getting those rejection letters. But anyway, I never entered any art show until 2010. I entered the AWS in New York. No, I entered in 2009 and got rejected. But you know what? The world kept turning. I entered again in 2010 and I got in. So it's only been about 10 years that I've been doing this professionally. Although I've been painting for many more years than that. I've only been painting as a so-called real artist for about 11 years, 10 or 11. Again, a very long answer to a short question. But what I'm saying is we all tell ourselves stories about what we can and can't do, or what we should and shouldn't paint, or how we can become an artist or not. And the real world, if we're open to it, has a lot more options, I think, than we're often aware of. At least in my case, that was true. I had sort of a fixed idea of how things were going to go. And they all actually worked out beautifully, but not in the way I had planned. So You just never know.
It's always interesting to hear people's journeys because rarely do they go exactly the way we think they're going to.
Gosh, it couldn't be more true. That's so true. It's hard not to sort of envision, I think probably most of us do, what we want in life, and we sort of draw up mental vision boards for ourselves and how we think our future life is going to look. And it's hard to sort of let go of that if things don't go quite the way we planned. But rarely do things go exactly the way we plan, which I know sounds a little too philosophical, but it's also another reason I like watercolor so much, because it's been a perfect metaphor for life. Is that the more I try to control life and think I have things figured out, the more it's going to kick me in the nether regions and show me something else. But that's often the best thing that could possibly happen. It has been for me anyway. You can't get there this way, but you might be able to get there this way. So yeah, it's been humbling, but quite exciting. And why I say it reminds me of watercolor is because watercolor never does exactly what you think it's going to do.
Mm-hmm.
It sort of does, and then it takes a left turn. And I think if we become more experienced as artists, we watch that, what we would have a year or 2 years ago, something happens on our page that we would have called a horrible mistake and thrown our painting in the rubbish bin. With a little experience, you realize, oh, all right, I didn't plan that, but that looks pretty good. I'm going to keep that. And that's been the hardest thing. And I'm still learning that. Often when I'm teaching, I'll walk around and watch people paint and try to help as best I can. And I think the most hard for me is to see somebody that's just painted a very beautiful passage. And I'll say, oh, that looks great. What's wrong? You don't look happy. And they'll say, yeah, it's all right, but it's not the way I planned it. And then they'll scrub it off or throw it away or start over or go to the bar. And that's so frustrating because often the things we don't plan are the best parts of our painting. So another contrast I try to get in my work is a little bit of the planned and a little bit of the unplanned. I am, by nature, a planner, and I think, like many of us, I mistakenly tried to control my watercolors much too much in the beginning, and I am still guilty of that from time to time. So I have to just take a deep breath and let it run. It's going to be all right.
Ingrid says, I really love your book, Architect of Light, and I'm looking forward to your workshop.
Oh, great, Ingrid. Thank you. I like doing that book too. Yeah. That book was a fight, but it was well worth it. Another thing I love about watercolor, which I think is illustrated here, is the way, again, you can do this in oil or other medias, I know, but the way in watercolor where one thing can magically and almost instantaneously become another thing. Why I like this scene is because atmosphere can become substance. Water can become trees, trees become sky, water here grows up into the boat. So the natural world grows organically into the man-made. Here in the docks, the same thing. And again, you can do that in many medias. I just don't think it's as magical or as organic looking often as it can be in watercolor. I don't know. I never lose my excitement when I see that happening. So I'm always very thrilled when those magical little moments happen in my work.
Nikita is asking, how important is it to understand reality to express oneself?
Wow. I'd have to know a bit more. I think we all share a reality, but I don't think it's entirely the same or in the same order for each of us, which means I think we can all look at something, most of us, and see more or less the same thing. But the way we register that thing, whatever that is, let's just say, for an example, a tree. We could all look at a tree. We'll all see the same thing, but we don't take away from that the same memories or the same exact experience, if that makes sense. I think all of us go through the same things, but we go through them in a different order, different volumes, different times in our lives. And so all the things we see that we call reality have a different order for you than they might for me. I think there are painters I know well, and I've argued with them many times, who say the best thing, in fact, the only thing an artist, a painter should do is to honor the natural world and try to paint the world exactly as we see it. I respect that, but I don't believe that. I think Mother Nature is a great teacher, but she is just one. She's one of our many teachers. Imagination, dreams, invention, they're also teachers. They might spring from reality, but they're all very different. So I don't know, maybe that's a little too philosophical, but I think we should all study reality, but I think it's the artist's job to interpret that reality through the vision of his or her life experiences and memories as best they can, to try to be as authentic as they can. When we start out as artists, I think naturally we look to other artists who we admire. We want to paint like them. It's understandable. But of course, I think it's a tragic mistake. I know in some cultures and in some schools of thought, the best thing an aspiring painter can do is to copy the work of another painter. Nothing against that, but I think very soon you have to realize you need to move beyond that, because what you're really painting is not a technique. You're painting somebody else's experience, and you'll never be an authentic painter until you can at least try to paint your own experiences. They may be very similar to mine, but they may be very different indeed, and that's great. So I don't mind it when people, for example, in my workshop, I don't mind at all if people paint what I'm painting. But if you're so moved to want to use your own reference material, not paint what I'm painting, good on you. That's all to the good too. So.
I wanted to mention here that we are recording this, and that Joe will be getting this video up on YouTube probably by Monday. So
Fantastic.
if anybody wants to go back and review, our YouTube channel is available. You can get the information from our website, CWA, or even just search on YouTube for our CWA channel, and they'll find this video.
And whoever did the carousel of the exhibition, that is a work of wizardry. It's beautifully done. Congratulations and thank you. That was great to see. Obviously, I'm painting the tree now. I'm using this funky brush for those brush nerds out there. It's a liner brush. It has a big fat barrel at the bottom and then longer quills sticking out of the top that I've sort of adopted as a brush for painting trees. I sort of lay it on its side and scrape it across the rough paper. And it does a pretty good job of implying what a tree might feel like. It leaves a lot of air between the areas of leaves. If you press down a little harder, you can get a more saturated mass of foliage. If you lighten the pressure, you can get a lot of airier texture like I'm doing over here. Again, I'm trying to remember that this is the center of focus. So I want my darker colors, more saturated colors, and deeper edges to fall primarily in this bullseye here. As the painting dissolves out that way and a little bit out that way, I am lightening the tone, reducing the saturation, reducing the pressure, and being a little less specific. So the same tree, I hope, will sort of emerge from the mist, from the non-specific to the very specific here. If that makes sense.
Pat would like to know who makes that brush.
A lot of people make these. This one is made by, this one I bought off the street from a brush vendor in Rome, which I recognize could not sound more pretentious. But Da Vinci makes a beautiful series of them.
And what is it called again?
It's a modified liner brush. It's used by people who do calligraphy and sign painting, that sort of thing. But fine artists use them too. Escoda makes them. And I'm not sure who else, but I know that Da Vinci makes them, and that's all I can think of offhand. Escoda and Da Vinci. I will, I could take a photo of it and post it somewhere if anybody is really hankering to get one of these. So that looks pretty good. I want this tree to be there, but to sort of dissolve. If I want this over here to be a little less specific still, I'll hit it with my magic spray bottle. And some of that clarity will vanish just a little.
Lynn is asking if you are represented by any galleries, Thomas.
I'm in a few galleries, but no, I specifically choose not to be represented by any galleries. I'm in galleries if they allow me also to sell directly to collectors, is what I'm saying. I think it's very important for me, and I'm speaking only for myself, to have as much as possible a direct and one-on-one relationship with people who want to collect my art. So if a gallery has a problem with that, then I can't be represented by them. So I generally sell directly to collectors and private individuals. I'm not down on galleries in general. Obviously, I'm not. Some are quite good to me. But they are a business, of course, and they have to stay afloat, and they may have considerations that you as an individual independent artist may not have. So just think about that when you're trying to get your work out there. It's important for me to keep this painting tree pretty wet because I want to finish off the branch work in the leaves as much as I can while the foliage areas are still wet. So I'm trying to paint this fairly quickly. The reason is because I want the branches and the foliage to connect as much as possible. Another thing I'm always yammering on about in my paintings is connections. The water connected to the sky, the man-made connected to the natural world, one thing connected to another. I don't like any part of my painting to look as if it was added on later or pasted on or wandered in from another painting. I want everything to belong. So one easy way to do that is to paint as much as you can into an area that's still wet, and the paint will naturally connect itself. One area of the painting will connect organically to another area. So for example, here, this larger branch, I'll just swipe it up into the wet foliage so it sort of melts together. They'll have a little bit of identity, but also then sort of vanishes into the mist. For the bigger areas of this tree branch, I'm using a smallish synthetic flat brush. The reason is because you can cover a bigger area and you get some of these nice dry brush effects. When I move into the smaller branches, I will swap it out for a synthetic round. The color I'm using is essentially Van Dyke brown with a little bit of ultra blue in it. Starting to get a little too dry, but it's okay. It's working out. If I could give any advice for painting trees, feel more and think less. The more I think when I'm painting generally, or try to think, the worse off I am. It's another good reason to do these little sketches first. You can sort of get your thinking done and out of the way. And then when you paint, you can paint from a much more emotionally rooted place and not have to stop and think and plan in the middle of your painting. That's especially true, I think, when you're painting trees. The quicker, the more intuitively you can paint them, the more like calligraphy, the better they tend to look. I shouldn't say that while I'm in the middle of this because it might end up looking hideous. The philosophy is still the same.
Sandy would like to know what are the basic colors you've used for the leaves in the tree. It looks like you've used quite a few different colors in there.
Yes. Trees are not always green, obviously, but if they are, I would say my little lecture on green is I love green as a color, but as a pigment, it has frustrated me for years. Green pigments often dry very muddy and lifeless. And again, I'm giving a long answer to a short question. I was teaching a few years ago at Daniel Smith in Seattle. And I said to the group, because it was true, I don't use green pigment. It's too dead. So I always mix it with blues and yellows. I didn't realize that John, the owner of the company, was standing in the back of the room as I said that. And I heard an audible gasp go up. So after class, I was taken aside. No, I was given a tour of their paint making operation. And I went home with about 30 tubes of phenomenal Daniel Smith green pigments, and I've never looked back. So yes, I use green pigments now. What I'm saying in too many words is that I think the key to successful greens is variety. Meaning, if you use green, if you modify it with a little warm, so this is French ochre and a little raw umber, dropped into a dark green, which is a Daniel Smith jadeite green, and the more fresh, brighter green is a Daniel Smith serpentine green. Those are the only two greens I've used in this painting. But I have modified them here with French ultramarine, here with yellow ochre, and here with some raw umber. In other paintings, I would modify them with red. There's a bit of red in the painting behind, so some of that, a little of that shines through too, I hope. So anyway, the key to greens, I think, is variety and modification. Right out of the tube, green paints can sometimes look pretty stifled. But I do want to give a little shout out to this jadeite green and serpentine of Daniel Smith. And this isn't just a commercial plug. I mean it. They're phenomenal because they're made out of actual ground up minerals and stones and little flecks. So as the paint dries, especially on this rough paper, they begin to granulate and separate. And all these little flecks begin to float to the surface or sink down into the paper. So they get a sort of a natural, organic kind of variety that you don't have to do. They do it all by themselves. So there's these little warm red flecks in this jadeite green that float to the surface and give it a shimmer that keeps it from looking murky and dull. Whereas perhaps a Windsor green or a Viridian would never have that kind of lively shimmer to them that these do.
Pat is asking, what's the best advice you ever received?
The best advice I ever received, again, I'll sound like a smartass, and I'm sorry for this, is don't take advice. Don't take too much advice. It's the best advice I think I have to give, which doesn't mean you should ignore people, especially people you admire or like, or you think are successful or whatever. Sure, listen to them, listen to everybody. Pay attention, listen, maybe they have something useful for you. But the best advice I could give is go home, go out with your friends, think about it. And if whatever that guy or that girl said, if that makes sense to you, by all means, use it. But if, for example, if what I just said about greens or values or story or design, if anything I'm saying tonight just doesn't sit with you, please throw it out. That's the best advice I can give you. Listen to yourself. That's my best advice. Listen to others, but listen to your own voice more than anybody else's. I think we all know what we have to do. I think we all have everything we already need to become amazing painters or amazing people or whatever we want to be. We already have those skills. It's just a matter of living to peel back the layers to reveal whatever that is. That sounds a bit I don't know what that sounds like. Maybe a little glib. I don't mean it to be. I think I could have been a much better painter years ago if I didn't waste so much time worrying about what other people thought, or what I should paint, or what I should enter in this show, or if I should enter that show. There was a period a few years ago where it seemed like every big show, your national, American watercolor societies, all the big ones, it was the year of the bicycle. Everywhere I looked, there were bicycle paintings. Very few people love bicycles more than me. I love them. But I started to get concerned, like, why in the world is everybody all of a sudden painting bicycles? If you want to get into any big show, all you have to do is paint a bicycle and you're in. And I don't know, it was a clarifying aha moment for me, because I realized that's nonsense. Everybody is just painting what they think juries, judges want to see. And that's a surefire way to never get into any show. If I'm ever the juror of a show and you want to get in it, don't just assume if you paint a building, you're automatically in. It's probably the worst thing you can do. I wouldn't let myself in most shows if that were the case. Paint from the heart. Paint what you love because you love it. And those are the paintings that will sell. Those are the paintings that will get accepted by juries. And those are the paintings you will learn the most from and be the most proud of. So yes, my best advice is just don't take too much advice. Listen to yourself. I don't think I'm particularly smart, but I do think I probably somewhere on the inside know what I need to do to become a better painter and a better person all around. And when I stop waiting for somebody else to tell me what that is, I'll have a much better chance of finding it.
You sound like a philosopher too.
I'm not. I read a lot of philosophy though. I don't know if I want to go down that road, but a few years ago, I was on vacation with friends in Hawaii and I fell out of a tree. And drugs and alcohol were not involved, just clumsiness and stupidity. I always told myself the story that I was a graceful person, but evidently I'm not. Anyway, the point of it is I'm fine, but in order to get fine, I had to go to a lot of physical therapy and think about my relationship with trees.
Wow.
And, yeah. But anyway, my friend Sandy drugged me against my will to yoga. And also my physical therapist recommended it. Mm-hmm. I did not want to go to yoga because I thought, could there be anything more Southern California than that? Well, probably not. But anyway, I went and it changed my life. And I'm not going to become one of those people. But the thing I learned, among many in yoga, that's helped me as a painter, were a number of things. But the first thing was, I think all those years in New York when I was an architectural illustrator, I never took a breath. I would hold my breath literally and paint like this, clutching my brush at the very end, painting so carefully. Part of it had to do with the clients and the type of work I was doing, true. But part of it had to do with my sort of subconscious need to try to control watercolor. Yoga, among its many other benefits, teaches you, encourages you to just let go and to just breathe. And after about a month or two of yoga, I found, wait a minute, painting isn't giving me migraines anymore. And I realized I was breathing for the first time in 30 years. And whenever I get stressed out with my painting, which happens once every 20 minutes, I just take a deep breath. And the painting might still suck, but I feel a lot better. And then usually I can pull something out of the fire with my painting if I just breathe. So, yeah, from breaking my back, falling out of a tree like a moron, I got to become a better painter. But I also got very, very interested in reading books on Eastern philosophy and thinking and Eastern art in general. And that's been enormously useful and helpful to me as well.
It seems like everything needs to be connected in a painting, and everything in life that you learn is connected in some way too.
It's really what I'm trying to say without sounding too pretentious, but I think everything in life is connected. The bad and the good, the forgotten, the yet to happen, everything's connected. We're all connected too, I think, as people, whether we think we are or like it or see it or not. I think we all have far more in common than we don't. And I just think that mindset has helped me. So I'm not preaching in any way. I'm just saying that it's helped me. And because of all those experiences, I started to think about just the idea of connection in painting. Again, watercolor, just nothing works as well for me. In oil paints, you can plan and pre-plan and paint over, and it lacks, for me, it lacks that sort of walking out on the edge, that little thrill I get doing watercolor where you just know it could all go horribly wrong at any moment. But it's okay. It is just a piece of paper at the end of the day. And sure, if you're doing a demonstration and you do a really awful job, well, that's not great. But if you're going to fail, you may as well fail spectacularly in public, I say. But yeah, it's all the parts of a painting are connected, just as all the parts of our consciousness and subconsciousness are all connected as well. And I don't know, it all fits together into my little watercolor life. So what I'm doing here, obviously, is trying to give a little bit more horizontal identity to the water. I want this sort of mysterious, misty look. So I don't want to go overboard. Generally speaking, my work over the last, 6 years, if there's one word that comes to mind, it's editing. If I can leave something out, I almost always am glad if I do. A question I often get is, how do you know when you're done with a painting? When I did a lot of client work, that was easy. I had a deadline, so I knew that Friday at 4 o'clock, that was my deadline. So I was going to have to be done, like it or not. But when you paint for yourself and you're just home alone or out with friends painting, and you're having a great time just painting along, how do you know if you're done? It really is hard, because if you're anything like me, painting is fun. It's joyous. And when you get into the groove and you're going along, you sort of hate to stop. But it's very easy to overcook a painting. And there's no going back too much. I mean, there's some things you might be able to salvage, but generally speaking, when it's overdone, it's too late. So someone once told me, when you hear that little voice inside your head say, I don't know if I'm done. Maybe it needs just this one more little, that's usually the time you say to yourself, stop. It doesn't need that one little thing. It's not always true, but it almost always is true. It's so easy to do too much. Another great quality of watercolor too is, I think, its ability to imply things that are not stated. You can imply a lot of details in a building or a forest or a seascape even, just by a tiny bit of detail here can sort of carry the viewer's eye. It's a way to involve the viewer in your painting, I think. If you give them a little bit and then make them work for the rest, make them fill in the blanks and fit the pieces in together. I like that in artwork. When I go to galleries and art shows, I am drawn to work that is more impressionistic or expressionistic even. I always say if I live long enough, I'll become an abstract painter. I don't know if that's true because I think at this rate, I will have to be about 120, but I like the idea.
So are you using a dry brush technique there in the water?
Here, yes. As I get away from the center of focus, I'm going to more scratchy, less specific brush marks. So I went to a small flat, and now I'm moving into a larger flat to do some more of the same effect. This is a cobalt teal that I'm putting over the top, sort of a bigger flat brush. Not exactly a wash because it's a synthetic brush, but just to give some of this dry brush start and stop skip marks so it looks a little scratchier and less formal than these really tight lines do here. So you get this nice dialogue again between the stated and the implied. I love it. And I'll carry that through over here. Again, I don't want to do too much. I don't think the water needs too much more. It could stand just a little bit more mystery at the bottom and a tiny bit more value, I think. So what I'm using is a bit of manganese blue and a little bit of cobalt teal. Another little suggestion is don't be afraid to paint up. You don't always have to go down or across. You can paint up from the bottom. This is a little thing I do all the time. It's a really nice way to connect shapes, connect values, to give sort of a base to the painting if it needs it, which in this case it does. But it's one of those things that you can very easily go overboard with and do too much.
What was the name of the paper again that you were telling us about that you really liked from China?
Oh, I love this paper. Speaking of that paper and this image, they used the original of this image as one of their blocks. This is a Bao Hong paper, Baohong. It's beautiful, all cotton, mold made. It comes in hot, cold, and rough. I have recently become a brand ambassador because I tried it in China and I so fell in love with it that now they're making some with my name on it. And anyway, it's going to be distributed in the US soon, sometime this year.
Nice.
Yeah, it's nice. It's the rough, though. I don't know if it's for everybody. Apparently, it's their least popular surface. It's a little bit like painting on the lunar surface. It's so bumpy, but I just love it. So what I'm doing this is, I don't want to knock away any of those scrapey edges, but I'm just trying to encourage these tonalities to bleed together a little bit. So a little bit more mystery without washing away any of the value. Encourage this kind of thing to happen where the piers sort of melt into the water and the boat becomes the water, and the bank here with what might be some bushes or trees on it just sort of bleeds down into the shady late afternoon still water of the canals. Here I didn't mention, I used a very tiny rigger brush for some of these very thin lines, some of the lines on the boat and some of the small twigs and branches in the tree. You can use any little round brush. You don't have to buy a rigger, but I have a few riggers. I tend to not use them. I probably would if I would just grab one, but I probably have 1,000 brushes, maybe 2,000, but I only paint with about 6 or 8. So again, generally less is more.
Do you ever use white paint?
I'm not a purist, so I'm not opposed to it, but I rarely do. The reason is because I think opaque media added to a transparent media can look a little pasted on, a little false. But I have used it, yes, sometimes, just for like a little highlight, a little touch up. And there are some paintings where it's part of the whole story you're trying to tell, where it looks right at home. But I don't rely on it. I very much, I guess I like the challenge. So instead of climbing trees now, I paint watercolor. I'm not likely to break any bones, but I don't use masking and I don't use white paint, generally speaking. There are times I think I'd be better off if I used masking, but I just like the challenge of not doing it, just to see if I can, like in an area of negative painting like that or like that, if I can save the light just by painting around it rather than masking it off. I've been asked why I don't use masking. I don't really have a good answer, but I think it was in my years as a commercial architectural illustrator, I would spend upwards of a week, I swear, masking off mullions and little windows, and it's the smell of it that got to me, if anything. But anyway, it was just sort of a change. Again, it's just an example of, all of our experiences are not the same. There are painters, some of whom world-class, astounding painters who can use masking masterfully. I am just not among them. I'm not good at it. I don't like it. And so I'm not skilled at it. Maybe if I forced myself to do it, I could get better. But there are paintings where I realize it's just my obstinance maybe if I would just use some, I'd be happier. But yeah, I don't use masking, and I tend not to use white paint.
What about scraping paint off? Do you do that much?
No. If I had to, I would, but I don't. Again, I'm not opposed. Anything that works for you, do it. But I tend not to. Again, it's sort of I hate this word, journey I'm on, is to try to simplify both my life and therefore my paintings. So I try to not use anything that isn't absolutely required. It's not like some discipline. It's just, I want it simpler. I want to use less colors, less techniques, less this, less that. So no, I'm not opposed to anything that works for you. But again, I look back at my old paintings and I just see a sea of techniques. There's scraping, there's white paint, there's splattering, there's this, there's that. You cannot see anything other than a sea of technique.
Well, you brought up splattering. Is that something you don't do much of either?
I do it occasionally. I used to do it way too much. I think it's perfectly fine, but I think it's a very, very easy thing to overdo. And it's hard to know when enough is too much. But I do it. I still do it. I was thinking, while I'm blabbing, I was thinking of splattering in a little bit of lavender on this tree area. It's one color I do use for splattering because against green, it's a very nice counterpoint. But as I was looking at it, I decided, I don't think it needs it. It'll look too busy. But I'm not opposed to it at all. Again, I'm not opposed to anything. If it works for you, go for it. And also, you should try it. You should try anything.
We're getting a lot of positive feedback on the chat that this has been a very good demo, very inspiring, perfect demo and lecture. Everybody's really enjoying it.
Well, that makes my day, makes more than that. But thank you guys so much. Essentially, I'm done. I hear that little voice inside me saying, enough is enough. I'm having a good time doing this. I could continue painting little leaves and branches for the next hour, but I shouldn't because I'll overcook this painting. But the main idea is there. What I was trying for was this band of mysterious light that reached through in the horizontal, in the midground, a mid-tone background, a bit of mid-tone in the foreground, and then my darkest darks here and here, so that the man-made boats, the man-made dock connect to the water. That all connects to the tree. The mist connects to the land connects to the sky, and the sky connects to the water. All things connect. So thank you guys so much for your attention, for all the good questions. And if there's an opportunity when this is posted online, I can field other ones. And please, obviously, feel free to be in touch with me with any questions you have. I'm always happy to do my best to answer everybody. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Thomas. So beautiful.